Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Indianaut Podcast, where we interview some of India's next best analytical and creative minds who are not only revolutionizing their own field, but at the same time transforming India's entrepreneurial ecosystem one step at a time. Our guest for the day is a public policy entrepreneur and the founder of The Dialogue, an emerging policy think tank. A lawyer by profession, he is one of the leading voices in India's policy ecosystem, with a focus on technology, energy, strategic affairs, and development studies. We have with us Kazim Rizvi. Let us jump right into the conversation. Hi Kazim, I hope you're all settled in.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Gautam.
Okay, great. So let us start things off. You started the dialogue back in 2017, and ever since then, it has been a wonderful journey for you guys. So why don't you walk us through your Indianaut origin story, since we've officially dubbed you an Indianaut?
Right. So thanks a lot, first of all, Gautam, for having me here and making me, sort of talk about the journey I had. So back in 2015, winter of 2015 is when I started ideating about the dialogue. And it basically came from deep frustration with the way Indian political discourse was taking place. And me and a few of my friends, we sort of figured out that there was a lack of progressive policy based discussions in the Indian discourse. And that was something which was missing, still is, but that was one of the key reasons why we came up with the idea of creating a platform which would facilitate policy dialogues and policy discussions on various issues. And that could be a way to inform the government on the impact of policies and why we need to enact or come up with regulations which help the country go forward. So in 2016, we sort of ideated the platform, and then we registered in 2017, mid 2017. That was when I left my full time job. And in June 2017, we registered the organization as a non for profit, and that's how we started the think tank. We work on three key pillars, and the work we do is around informing government and other stakeholders on the impact of policy and the need for going ahead with a progressive policy regime in the country. And the focus for us for the last 3 years has been predominantly been tech policy. That's the area where we have a lot of focus on. Of course, we would like to diversify going ahead in the future, but right now, tech policy constitutes pretty much 90% of the work we do. And the way we come about with our programs is very simple. We commission research, so we come up with various studies on issues around data protection, privacy. We are looking at e-commerce. We are looking at technology policy from different angles, cybersecurity, the geopolitics of tech policy, as well as foreign policy interlinkages of technology policy in India, as well as surveillance reforms. And we are also coming up with studies around telecom issues and how that sort of works and closely intermingles with technology. So we look at a complete sort of overview of technology in the country and even emerging technologies such as AI, and IoT and other areas where we sort of have a lot of focus on. And we come up with research papers. We work with government. We inform them. So we submit our recommendations to them on a regular basis. And we also drive discussions and public consultations where we invite stakeholders from different backgrounds and different expertise to come and join us and give us inputs on the impact of these policies, internet regulations, social media regulations as well. And then we collate these ideas, and then we go back to the government, and then we keep informing them and telling them that, look, these are the issues and this is how you should solve, and basically go ahead with drafting a more progressive policy regime which can help in terms of creating jobs. It helps in also making sure that India is ecosystem which receives enough investments, protecting users' rights, protecting human rights on the internet, and as well as protecting privacy, which is the key focus for the work we do.
That's actually quite excellent, Kazim. I have a bunch of follow-up questions on this answer, so I'm just going to start my mental checklist now. So the first thing being that you talked about entering public policy as a discipline alongside your peers. Back in 2016, this idea came to your mind, and then you officially entered it back in 2017. So, over the past few years, we've really seen public policy emerge as a discipline, specifically amongst the younger generation. So, why do you think
Right.
there has been this rise in this discipline or this interest, sudden interest in this discipline?
So Gautam, I graduated from law school in 2012, and at that time, when I was studying, public policy was just beginning as a profession. It wasn't really a very organized sector as legal field was and still is, and there was a lot of interest in me to sort of understand what is public policy all about and what is the idea behind policy. And it so happened that I wanted to, when I left law school, I did litigation for a while, and it just didn't cut the mustard for me. And I realized that I wanted to do something broader and something more comprehensive, something with a bigger impact on society. And public policy as a field appealed to me because the idea of public policy is to basically inform the stakeholders and come up with policies for the public, for the community, which helps the society go forward. And that sounded really idealistic to me, and that sounded really sort of, it matched my focus on coming up with guidelines and regulations that can help India usher into the 21st century as a country which protects its citizens' rights and also ensures that we are on a great path of economic growth. And so it happened that I started taking more and more interest in the field, and I worked in a consultancy firm. Then I worked with a bilateral institution as well, and that's where I really sort of understood the nuances of how the ecosystem works. And a lot of the work we do is around informing through evidence-based research. So the two pillars, the three pillars which I spoke about earlier. Uh, with respect to research and taking the research to the right stakeholders, when we started the dialogue, one of the gaps we saw in the domain was that there was a lot of great research happening, but the important people were not really talking about it or getting to know about it or really reading it. And the outreach and
I'm
the
sorry. I'm sorry to
engagement was
interrupt
a
you over
big
here.
gap.
I'm sorry to interrupt you over here. When you say important people, do you mean the various stakeholders such as the RBI or the various public bodies, the government?
Yeah.
Are those the important people?
Government, bureaucrats, parliamentarians, people who work closely with them, influencers, those who have some say in terms of what should the new vision of India's tech policy or whatever area you're working on should be. And that was the gap we tried to cover, while at the same time making sure that we came up with independent research which had strong database, data driven ideas, as well as inputs from people who know what they're talking about. I think that was also very crucial for us to be able to sort of compile in a format which was appealable to the stakeholders. And that's how we started doing our consultations, where we invited industry, we invite experts, consultants, activists, researchers, think tankers, bilateral institutions, multilateral institution experts. So all of their voices, combining all of these voices into one piece, and then arriving at a solution, and then giving it to the government, and then continuously completing this loop, right? Coming up with more research ideas and coming up with consultations. And that was the nature of public policy, which sort of we started focusing a lot more on. And now what we are seeing in the last 3-4 years is the establishment of more think tanks in India. First of all, I think there have been more think tanks than before. And second is the fact that a lot more young people in the age of mid 20s or early 30s are taking interest in this space, because I'm seeing that a lot of them want to make a difference in the way this country is functioning. And I think it's very simple. If you want to make a difference, you have to do something about it. And what we were able to do and are trying to do is build this institution which facilitates multiple perspectives and then comes up with ideas that can help the government sort of navigate the path, the very technical and very difficult path of coming up with a policy which caters to public at large. And that's not an easy job. I mean, you have to make a lot of compromises. So it's our job to see what best solutions we can arrive at with the limitations we have, with the opportunities we have.
Okay. I want to focus on two different aspects over here based on your answer. The first being that do you think that the government now or the various stakeholders, because of the rise and emergence of think tanks, are they proactively accepting recommendations? Are they proactively accepting responses? Are they proactively listening to what various other intermediaries have to say about various tech policies? For example, if we look at the most recent example of, say, cryptocurrency, right? So the thing is that back in March 2020, the Supreme Court went back and revoked the ban on cryptocurrency, which was put in place by the RBI, right? But we are recently reading once again news that there is a possibility that crypto could be banned again through a
Right.
bill in the parliament. But a lot of think tanks and a lot of experts do voice their concerns that instead of say banning cryptocurrency, there should instead be regulation. So do you think that certain technology sectors where the government where the government or various stakeholders do not fully comprehend as to what the situation is, or whether they're stifling innovation or not, do you think in these places the government is actually listening to other intermediaries such as yourself, or are they reacting in a knee-jerk way?
I think it's a mix of both. There are times when the government has come up with uh, draft bills or draft policies which are more maybe a knee-jerk reaction to the situation. But at the same time, I would say that government is driving consultations at the same time. Uh, we are having a very strong consultation in the data protection bill, for example.
Right.
Right? It's been going on for the last couple of years when the Justice Shri Krishna came out with this report. And after that, the government came up with the draft bill and then another bill last year in December. And that process is going on. There's a joint parliamentary committee looking into it, and they are taking inputs from multiple stakeholders. So, yes, the government is interested to hear what others have to say. They are interested in understanding what multiple views are coming out from India's tech policy ecosystem. But at the end of the day, it's their decision
Right.
to
Absolutely.
draft policies and come up with laws the way they think is best for the nation, and in their wisdom that's the power they have because they are an elected government. But however, I think the example you have mentioned about cryptocurrency is a great one. So another example which I want to talk about is the non-person data report, which was just released by the committee of experts, and that there is a consultation going on there as well. We've given our inputs, and a lot of other stakeholders have also sort of spoke about the need for more work on the report because it's not a finished product yet. So I do believe that experts and I mean the government stakeholders are listening. In fact, we've had some of them talk to us, speak to us about it, and we've interacted with them, and they've always been proactively welcoming these suggestions and these inputs. Another example I can give you is on Arogya Setu. And even though that's not a finished job, when we look at the privacy concerns of the Arogya Setu app, there are still a few concerns. But from where it was in early 2020 to where we are now, we've seen a sort of shift in the government taking this issue more seriously, the issue of privacy, and trying to come up with guidelines and policies which adhere to a basic benchmark or a basic strong data protection benchmark or a framework. In fact, we were one of the organizations that pushed for progressive privacy policies within the app itself, and we saw some of those suggestions coming out in the government in the draft policy and the guideline later on. Although there are a few gaps, still there are a few gaps which have to be met. I mean, they sort of the issues around source code and etc. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. It's not a. I mean, you can't say that government is listening completely and taking all the inputs and coming up with how the community wants it to be. But at the same time, you can't also say that there is completely opaque functionality with respect to how they perform. We are somewhere in the middle. The fight or the struggle is that how best can we make sure that we put our inputs and suggestions which are reflective in the policy documents, which cater to the entire society at large and ticks all the boxes of privacy, of economic benefit, of making sure that Indian industry grows as well, of making sure that you get investments from abroad. So there are many areas and many pillars to how policies and laws are drafted and the impact the regulations will have, and these impacts are far-reaching, and which is where I think consultation is critical for the government to continue to do so. However, at the same time, there have been instances where the government has not given enough time to maybe some of the issues which is trying to work on, and maybe we've also felt that there have been times when there have been too many regulations on digital ecosystem at the same time, which makes it look like, are we trying to hurry up into coming up with draft policies? I think we should wait a little, talk a little more, and then come up with guidelines which cater to all the pillars of the ecosystem. So I think, yeah, that's a work in progress, and we are definitely part of that ecosystem, and we keep pushing the government as well as other stakeholders to make sure that at the end of the day, what we have is a version which is closest to what the entire society deserves.
Okay, Kazim, that sounds great. All right, I completely understand where the dialogue now fits into the entire public policy ecosystem, right, and how the dialogue is engaging with various government stakeholders to try to push more progressive economic and tech-based policy reforms. All right, but now I want to focus on your organization slightly more deeply, right? Because the thing is that you're an entrepreneur at the end of the day, and I want to focus and understand exactly how think tanks work. All right, because the thing is that the dialogue is giving out information which is a public good, right? And consumption of information by one person does not preclude someone else from consuming it, even if they haven't paid for it, for example. So I want to understand, how does a think tank like the dialogue monetize the information or the research it generates? And in the most bluntest of terms, how does a startup make money?
Yeah, so it's very simple, Gautam. We organize consultations, we organize events, so we get sponsored by that for that, so by the industry or by non-for-profit organizations or philanthropic organizations. Then we come up with research, so we get sponsored for that as well. At the same time, we also we work with government bodies in the past where we've been paid for the research we've done. Similarly, we are also engaging with bilateral institutions, multilateral institutions as well, where some of them fund some of the research or consultations which we drive. And that's how we are able to sort of keep coming up with regular inputs and reports. So it's a very straightforward model, and the idea is to make sure that we are regularly churning out submissions and reports which we then take feedback on, also from the people who are reading it, the stakeholders who are consuming it, as well as the sponsors and the organizations that are supporting us. So it's a sort of a loop that we continuously drive, and that's how we are able to make sure that we have enough people in the team who are able to help us, support us, and keep coming up with the research input output that we need. So I now wish to focus on your subject matter expertise, right? And that is the tech policy of India. So let us start off with the first topic. All right. So recently, the Wall Street Journal did a piece alleging that Facebook India's public policy head had his or her own political leanings, which influenced decisions made by Facebook with respect to the hate speech policy of India for India. In the larger context of safe harbor rules and free speech these apps enable, do you think that something can be done to ensure that intermediaries such as Facebook, Twitter, or various other social media platforms at least uniformly apply the community guidelines they have set out for themselves? Because we've seen examples where statements made by Donald Trump can be construed to be false, right? But at the same time, they've still been allowed to stay on the platform because at the end of the day, he is the president of the United States of America. So and what that Wall Street Journal piece alleged, that in India, a couple of statements made by politicians could be considered hate speech, but they were not taken down, and rather they were quite openly promoted of the sorts. So, do you think that these platforms are doing enough, and are they even enforcing their own existing rules properly to everyone, are they showcasing biases? So I think this is a recurring question, and a question which has been asked a lot over the last couple of months, especially with how things have unfolded, as you mentioned. And I think this is a debate in the interliability space, which is an ever-evolving debate, and this requires a lot of attention from all stakeholders to make sure that we have an internet which is free for all yet safe for all. I think just to start off with, I think it's fundamentally critical that all platforms, be Facebook or Twitter or whoever is publishing third-party content, comes up with transparent community guidelines which people are reading, people have access to, and people know how these guidelines function. I think that's fundamentally critical for platforms to make sure that happens. Number one. Number two, where we are seeing this entire debate going forward is also with respect to how content is being taken down. So once again, the people who are publishing the content on these platforms, they want greater trust with the platforms they are on. I think this is which is where it's very critical that these platforms work with people and civil society and other stakeholders to keep refining and improving on the community guidelines so that they have the most robust mechanisms to take down hate content wherever their guidelines are sort of flagging the hate content. So I think that's the second point, which is very important for these platforms to make sure. Third part is to have greater accountability with regard to the schemes of content moderation, the way content removal is taking place, and the implementation. How are you implementing these committee guidelines? What are the sort of parameters you're judging to take down some content, and how are you judging those parameters? So I think those aspects have to be very clearly laid out for the platforms. Then I think what's also very important, and what we are also hearing, is the fact that the IT Act might get amended in the coming months and years. We believe that third-party auditing of the content is the third-party auditing with respect to how these community guidelines are functioning is important. And it is critical that these platforms are not just developing robust community guidelines with input from public community, publicly share their update and detailed content monitoring, moderation, takedown protocols, but also the fact that this is all reviewed regularly and it's updated and evolving on a continuous basis, the way the society is evolving as well. So I think as society is evolving with time, as things are changing with time, these guidelines must also evolve with time. And that should be a process where the people should be at the heart of it, the consumer should be at the center of it. And that's where civil society organizations, NGOs, human rights activists, and industry, government, all the stakeholders have to come together, including consumers, to sort of arrive at something which is progressive in nature and which makes sure that everything is functioning as it should be. Having said that, it's always a challenge, to make sure that you are keeping sort of everything as it should be. And I think that challenge, to meet that challenge, it is important that you get the support of the wider community, and the wider community is there to support these platforms to help them evolve and sort of progressively update the community guidelines.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense in that. I want to jump on the next topic now, and that is the Chinese app ban. So there's no more PUBG, there's no more TikTok, there's no more cam scanner. So do you think this is a justified policy response, given how the Chinese firewall in China prevents applications as well? Or is it an extreme measure taken by the Indian government?
So I think it's again, I've said this before in the media, the fact that this is again a double-edged sword. What is happening? See, on one hand, one can understand the sentiment of the government behind banning the Chinese app. There was a huge strategic compulsion for the government to act and to do something about, the adventurism on the border. The Chinese, the PLA was trying to sort of, go beyond the positions they are holding, and I think that's something which I think the Indian Army is tackling at the border very well. Now, leading up to that, the Indian government, of course, decided to ban these apps, and while you can sort of understand why they are banning these apps and why they're doing it, because it's a response to the aggressive sort of positioning of the PLA at the border and the whole Chinese aggression against India. But at the same time, on technical grounds, the ban is flawed, because we're looking at the IT Act and the way the government has gone about banning the apps. If it were to go to the Supreme Court, it may not sort of pass the test of the court. So what do you do in this situation? The ideal way forward should have been, still is, a data protection law regime which sort of has clear mechanism where it sort of identifies privacy concerns, security concerns, and then the government has greater teeth legitimacy as well to be able to ban something which it deems unfit for the country. But the IT Act currently through which it's banning doesn't. So I think this is where I think the whole problem is. However, at the same time, the aggression from the China and the threat from China is huge. And John, just looking at the apps, I think you're looking at the hardware technology which they're trying to sell us, especially the 5G technology. The threat over there is greater, and I think their Indian government has been more proactively taking a stance with respect to at least reviewing the technology more comprehensively, and also having more internal discussions with respect to whether they should implement the 5G from China, from Huawei ZTE or not. So those concerns are huge, and those concerns are also very legitimate. But at the same time, if you do not have a data protection law, you will not have the legal teeth and also a mechanism to be able to protect the privacy and security of the citizens of India. So this comes back to our original point, and we've been talking about it for a couple of years, actually 2.5, 3 years. The fact that you need a data protection law more than ever right now to protect not just citizens' privacy but also India's national security.
Right. Speaking of data protection, there have been a couple of recent updates which have taken place on that end from the government's end, right? We just spoke about the non-personal data protection laws, which will soon be enabled. We're looking at medicinal data, which is being looked at, medical data for personnel, which is also something that is going on in the policy space. So, do you think that steps being taken towards data protection are they creating a conducive or a restrictive environment for the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem for younger startups which are not able to adhere to such strict data policy reforms right from the get go?
No, I no, I think data protection laws will help the Indian startups grow. I think privacy is critical, and nothing can be compromised with respect to user privacy, because the consumer is at the heart of the data economy. So the privacy rights sort of come before the economic output. But at the same time, yes, I think the way the laws are drafted, especially when you're looking at one big problem is localization of data in India. Now, that is going to create a lot of hurdles for Indian entrepreneurs. The passage of a data protection law, a strong data protection law, will actually enable Indian startups and Indian industry to sort of create more jobs. And
But the problem will be if you are storing or localizing all the data within the territory of India and not allowing it to flow to other countries. That is going to create a lot of hurdles, lot of challenges for the entrepreneurs in India. Number two is in the non-personal
I
data
believe
and
you're
committee
referring to
report.
I believe you're referring to strong data localization acting as a hindrance.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah. Data localization will hinder Indian startups' growth. Not a data protection law. In fact, a data protection law will actually help them. But if within the ambit of a data protection law, you have data localization, which we have currently, that's going to cause some challenges. Number two is when you look at the non-person data committee report, which came out, which is basically saying that all the anonymized data and non-person data, which part of that is our insights of companies should be mandatorily shared with other businesses. This is going to create further hurdles for the startups and the entrepreneurs as well as the industry. It also might lead to certain intellectual property conflicts, which will make India a less attractive destination for investors to invest in the future, which means lesser jobs and lesser growth for our companies. So there are certain sort of sub policies within these draft regulations which are of a problem, and there is a lot of consultation taking place within the ecosystem to address these issues. And what we've seen, the data protection bill from 2018 to 2019, government has taken a step forward with respect to localization. They have sort of eased it a bit, but not enough yet to for the industry or for the ecosystem to say, yeah, this is a great bill. So there is some work required there, and I think there's a lot of work required on the non-person data committee report, which requires further consultation and has to address IP challenges, forcing data sharing, also the lack of data flows between countries. So these issues, these economic issues have to be addressed, as well as the lack of a surveillance law in India currently means that what we are seeing in the data protection law and the NPT report is clear access to data to the government whenever they want. And again, once again, that is some sort of that will create trust barrier between the industry and the government. And it also could make India a less attractive destination, because we've spoken to a lot of startups in industry and they say, well, if the government just asks for it, we have to give. That will make it a little more difficult to do business in India. So that reduces the ease of doing business ranking. So poorer data protection laws will have a direct consequence on India's GDP growth. The need for surveillance reforms will enhance India's attractiveness as a market for investors. So a lot of these policies and laws which cater to citizens' right and consumer right have a clear economic consequence. And the greater we protect the consumer and the citizen, the better the economic output would be.
I think speaking on this topic, I think there is a great social response as well, right? Because lack of privacy also has a chilling effect on people. Their trust and comfort while using various social media platforms or using various other platforms where they're sharing their data. The comfort and the privacy over there. These are important factors now for the Indian and internationally for people in general.
You're looking at a European company, for example, and you look at GDPR, and
I think we should all watch the Social Dilemma once just to reconfirm things on Netflix.
Absolutely. And for example, when you look at GDPR, and now GDPR is probably the benchmark of data protection law in the world, and it has clear safeguards for consumers with respect to violation of their rights on the internet. At the same time, it allows free flow of data through multiple mechanisms. Some of those are advocacy mechanisms which Europe can sign with other countries, where you can do business with other countries. You can facilitate data sharing protocols, and you can enable the creation of new age technologies such as AI, AI and other technologies, which the foundation of those technologies is actually dependent on access to data. So you can't really stop the flow of data in the world. You can't really create a sort of a blanket firewall or a sort of a data wall where you say this cannot go beyond the borders of this country. That will harm economic interests. What you can do is come up with certifications where you have minimum safeguards and threshold of data protection of Indian data wherever it goes, be it Europe, US, within Asia or other continents. So you basically are having the highest standards of privacy, but at the same time, you're also making sure that you maximize the economic opportunities with respect to processing of data, because that's how the economies globally are evolving, and data is the future. And we've sort of been talking about it, we've been reading about it a lot, and that's how things will shape up in the next 10, 15 years. And that's where China has sort of done a lot of work. And I think we also need to sort of support our industries and organizations and startups to go and set up offices abroad, process data abroad, come up with technology solutions for the global customer, which can then help us to actually create greater economic value for our own company, which will lead to more jobs and better GDP growth.
Okay, great. So I just have two more questions for you. What advice do you have for aspiring folks who wish to enter the public policy space?
I think a lot of the folks who are entering are quite smart, and they have a lot of wisdom already. But I think the advice I can give, learning from my experiences, just the need to be patient. Number one, with outcomes. I think what we're seeing is a lot of people just want instant outputs and outcome. That won't happen. And India is a slow country. The ecosystem works slowly. We have a lot of stakeholders you have to work with. So things take time to happen. So I think those who want to start a think tank or want to make an impact must remember that it's a long game, it's a long battle, and you're here for the long run. So got to be patient with how you sort of institutionalize your organization, come up with ideas, and then start talking about it without falling too fast on your head. So it's critical that the people who are trying to start something new understand that they have a long 10, 15, 20 year vision, For the dialogue when we started, and we are, I think, in the first 5 years of any organization, you're still in the starting phase, and we've just finished 3 years. We are still figuring out a lot of things for ourselves also. And as things are shaping up, as the country is moving forward, as things are happening, you have to be flexible with how your organization will evolve, but have a broader vision, but you should be flexible in terms of tailoring the needs of the ecosystem, also as tailoring the needs of multiple stakeholders, as well as tailoring the needs of what you yourself want the organization to be. So it's never a functioning, it's never an outcome in an isolated format. Whatever organization you are doing, you're building, it's part of a larger ecosystem, so it has to integrate with how the ecosystem works. And if you want to bring change, the change has to come internally. It has to be bottom up, and it has to be pushed through within the ecosystem upwards. So that's very critical for those who want to start. They sort of understand that. Also, the fact that the ideas which you talk about must be implementable in real life. And many times what we've seen is, we have this tendency of bringing in ideas from across the world and just sort of copy pasting it for India. Many times that doesn't work. So it's important to see what works for India, what works in the current political ecosystem that you are living with, what works in the current ecosystem where the industry is, what works in the current regulatory infrastructure, and how much you can move the needle. And you have to take it step by step rather than going for one big sort of change. The change has to be incremental. Change can never be like a leap. At least in the policy ecosystem, change comes in an incremental manner. For example, when you just giving an example, the TRAI just came up with a report where it said that the OTTs should not be regulated right now. The government should take some time and then come back to it. Now, these guidelines and this report is a success for a lot of us, but it took time for the ecosystem to arrive at a point where it can convince the TRAI to do this. So, and it's an incremental change, and change happens in smaller basis, and it then sort of becomes one large policy change which leads to a big outcome. Another thing which I think is critical is to be able to measure small success into big success. So, in terms of talking about policy, the first success would be hearing or sort of getting people to hear you. That's an important success. Then building capacity of stakeholders. That's an important success. Once you build their capacity, once they understand the issues, only then will they be able to sort of work with you and say, okay, fine, let's reform this idea. You can't go straight on and say, do this or do that. Nobody will listen to you. You have to be able to understand what language to speak in, how to speak in, and then having small milestones step by step, and then build towards a larger milestone of eventual policy change or reforms or whatever you want to talk about. So that again is a 5 to 10 year journey, and it takes time to build legitimacy. It takes time to build authority in the space, but at the same time it's very critical to have positive progressive relationships with people who are in power and people who can move the needle and people who understand these issues, as well as people who want to talk about these issues. So you have to bring everybody together. It has to be a collaborative effort. A lot of the times we are seeing that people tend to be confrontational, and that's not going to work. Especially in these times, confrontational attitude is not going to lead to any policy success. It has to be a collaborative approach. It has to be a integrated approach with stakeholders. Yet at the same time, making sure that your voice is heard the way you want it to be heard. So you have to be able to speak in the language where that the stakeholder who is sitting on a policy or is working on reforms or whatever understands, and those ecosystems understand your point of view and the point of view you want to talk about by having taken inputs from multiple stakeholders yourself. So merging all of that together and then arriving at a solution, that takes time. So I think patience is critical.
Okay, that's great. I have one final question for you. All right. How conducive do you think is the current policy framework of India for the entrepreneurial ecosystem? and how can the various actors improve it further? Like, what would be the next immediate steps they should be taking to make this a much better environment for entrepreneurship?
So, are we talking about entrepreneurs in think tanks or general
entrepreneurs? In general entrepreneurship.
I feel that there is a need to support the entrepreneurs right now, and there is a need to deregulate the sector a little more. And I do believe that government should think of not just financial support and talking about loans or cheaper loans or grants, but at the same time fostering the attitude of innovation is important, and that's where critical feedback and the ability to take critical feedback is very important for the government. I think that's not happening as much as we would like that to happen. At the same time,
do you think that the recent focus on the word Atmanirbharta and the recent focus on fostering Indian innovation?
No, that's great.
Right, but do you think that is a step in the right direction? Do you think that is something where
good words? I mean, those are great words, but a lot of that, even in the startup program we saw in 2015, hasn't really actually implemented anything on the ground. And organizations are still, sort of largely left to themselves to feed or to look after investments. We don't have a strong Indian VC venture capitalist ecosystem. Number one. Number two, I think talking about the startups and funding, the government is looking at allowing startups to list abroad, and which is a great step forward because they can access foreign market capital in foreign markets. But at the same time, government is forcing them to also list in India, which will reduce their valuation, which will also reduce their sort of overall ability to sort of get funding. So these policies are a hindrance. I mean, especially the one I just spoke about, and SEBI and the Ministry of Finance and other government departments are working on this. On one hand, they are doing a great job by allowing startups to list abroad, but then they are saying that a startup or a company has to list in India, which means that and in India, when you list in India, the sort of the mechanism is through profitability, and abroad it's through market valuation. And a lot of the startups in this sector, the tech sector, are based on valuation, focus a lot more on valuation, the long-term valuation, not just profitability, which is how India looks at it. And now, because of that, the overall valuation of the startup would reduce in that case, right? So this is something which the government should reconsider. This is, in fact, a major hindrance, and we've spoken to a few of these organizations, and they say that this is a challenge. Then again, just talking about tech and the policies in the privacy space or the NPD space hinder the growth of startups. The fact that you're forcing them to localize, mandatory data sharing, lack of surveillance reforms, and access to government with respect to any data they want at any point of time. These are the policies. Some of these policies are a little bit of hindrance and will definitely impact the growth of startups. So I think the government must relook at these policies, and we've been writing about it, publishing papers, sending submissions regularly. So I hope that something happens soon on this.
I think just adding to what you mentioned with respect to access to funding, I believe it was from 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, where he mentions that tech companies really focus on future cash flows rather than profitability at the get-go, right?
Yeah.
Because they're setting up their infrastructure, they're setting up their entire foundation. So they're looking at future cash flows, whether it was LinkedIn back in 2005 looking at future cash flows, or any other startup, or any other tech startup when it comes to that. Uber, even when Uber was listed, Uber wasn't profitable. Uber
exactly.
Was future profitability, right? And we all saw the WeWork debacle, but nonetheless, startups do rely on future cash flows rather than existing profitability. And I don't think the current Indian public market ecosystem will appreciate that greatly, right? Because over here, the focus on financial issues, the focus on existing financials is much greater than looking at the future outlook of the organization.
Right.
So I think definitely, if being allowed to list on, say, NASDAQ, for example, which is a much more tech-centric, or do we say stock exchange, as compared to, say, the Indian NSE or BSE, right? It would just provide access to greater liquidity and access to much better valuations for these startups, like you mentioned.
Exactly.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kazim. We had a great
pleasure, Gautam.
And we wish you and
Thanks
the
a lot.
dialogue the best of luck for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode. The Indianaut Podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook to receive all updates on the upcoming episodes. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you.